I'm so sorry. I wish I could have parked there, but my daughter... It's okay, baby girl.
I understand.
Sorry.
Your Honor, I'm so sorry. I know I shouldn't have parked there. But my daughter, my baby girl. Her words dissolved into sobs that echoed off the courtroom walls. The moment Judge Frank Caprio's voice cracked, I knew this wasn't going to be just another traffic violation case. I'm Adam Broderick, court reporter for the Providence Journal, and in 23 years of covering the Providence Municipal Court, I've never seen what I witnessed that cold February morning. The judge's hands were trembling as he removed his glasses, pressing his fingertips against his closed eyes. His shoulders shook. The entire courtroom fell into stunned silence as one of Rhode Island's toughest yet most compassionate judges openly wept on the bench. Standing before him was Maria Santos, a 34-year-old single mother whose weathered face told a story far more devastating than any court document could capture. Her eyes were red and swollen, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clutched a crumpled tissue in one hand and a plastic bag of hospital bracelets in the other. "Your Honor," she had whispered just moments before, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry. I know I shouldn't have parked there. But my daughter, my baby girl." Her words dissolved into sobs that echoed off the courtroom walls. Let me take you back to where the story really begins. Maria had been issued 3 parking tickets over the span of 6 weeks. Normally, Judge Caprio would have reviewed the case, assessed a fine, maybe offered a payment plan, and moved on to the next defendant. But when Maria's case was called that morning, something in her demeanor immediately caught the judge's attention. She walked to the podium with the hesitant steps of someone who had forgotten how to stand tall. Her clothes were clean, but worn thin, the kind of tired fabric that has been washed 1,000 times. Her hands shook as she placed her paperwork on the stand. And when she looked up at Judge Caprio, her eyes held a depth of pain that made everyone in that courtroom instinctively lean forward. "Ms. Santos," Judge Caprio began gently, reviewing the documents. "I see here you received 3 parking tickets, all in front of Hasbro Children's Hospital, all in zones clearly marked as no parking areas." He paused, looking at her over his reading glasses. "Can you tell me what happened?" Maria opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She pressed the tissue against her eyes, her whole body shaking with the effort of holding back tears. Judge Caprio's expression softened immediately. In all my years watching him, I've seen him be stern, fair, and occasionally humorous, but the look on his face at that moment was pure compassion. "Take your time," he said quietly. "There's no rush here." The courtroom was so silent, you could hear the heating system humming. Every eye was on Maria. Even the police officer who had issued the citations stood perfectly still, waiting. Finally, Maria found her voice. "My daughter, Sophia," she began, her accent thick with emotion. "She's 7 years old. Last Christmas Eve, she collapsed at her school holiday party." Maria's voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. "The doctors, they said she has leukemia. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his expression grave. "She's been at Hasbro for treatment ever since," Maria continued, the words now tumbling out as if she'd been holding them in for too long. "The chemotherapy makes her so sick. She cries for me every night. Every single night, Your Honor. She's just a baby and she's so scared." Maria's hands were gripping the podium so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "I work 2 jobs. I clean offices at night, and I work the morning shift at a diner downtown. I take the bus everywhere because I sold my car to help pay for Sophia's medical bills. But the buses don't run late enough to get me to the hospital after my night shift, so I borrowed my neighbor's old car." She pulled out the plastic bag she'd been carrying and held it up. Inside were at least 12 hospital visitor bracelets with dates written on them. "These are from every day I've been with her," Maria said, her voice rising with desperation. "I know I shouldn't have parked in those zones. I know the sign said no parking. But Your Honor, the parking garage, it costs $15 a day. I can't afford that. I can barely afford food. And Sophia, she needs me there. When she wakes up from the chemo, scared and sick, I need to be there holding her hand. Tears were now flowing freely down Maria's face. Several people in the courtroom gallery were wiping their own eyes. The stenographer, a woman named Carol who I'd never seen show emotion in 2 decades, had stopped typing and was openly crying. I got the first ticket when I ran in to bring Sophia her favorite stuffed animal. She'd been crying for it all night. I was only gone from the car for maybe 10 minutes. Maria's voice was pleading now. The second ticket I got because Sophia had a reaction to her treatment, and they called me. I ran from work, didn't even clock out, and parked the first place I could. And the third, her voice dropped to barely a whisper. The third was the day the doctors told me Sophia's cancer had spread. Judge Caprio had gone completely still. His face had paled, and I could see his jaw working as he tried to maintain his composure. That day, Maria continued, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just sat in that car in the no parking zone for an hour, crying, trying to figure out how to go back into that room and smile at my daughter and tell her everything was going to be okay when I knew. She couldn't finish the sentence. The judge slowly stood up from his chair. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. In all my years covering his court, I'd never seen Judge Caprio stand in the middle of a proceeding. Ms. Santos, he began, but his voice cracked on her name. He cleared his throat, but when he spoke again, the emotion was unmistakable. How is Sophia doing now? Maria's face crumpled. She's fighting, Your Honor. She's so brave. Braver than me. But the doctors say the next 3 months are critical. She needs a bone marrow transplant, but we're still looking for a match. And the bills. She gestured helplessly. I got a shut-off notice for my electricity last week. I've been taking extra shifts wherever I can, but it's never enough. The hospital social worker helped me apply for assistance, but there's so much paperwork, and I'm always so tired, and She broke down completely, her shoulders heaving with sobs. An elderly woman in the gallery stood up and handed Maria a packet of tissues. Judge Caprio removed his glasses and pressed his fingers against his eyes. When he lowered his hand, his eyes were glistening with tears. Ms. Santos, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I have children. I have grandchildren. And I cannot imagine. He paused, struggling to continue. I cannot imagine the strength it takes to do what you're doing, to work 2 jobs, to be there for your daughter every single day, to keep fighting when you're exhausted and scared and the world keeps pushing back. He picked up the citations from his desk and slowly, deliberately tore them in half. These tickets, he said, his voice growing stronger, are dismissed. All of them, completely dismissed. Maria's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. Your Honor, more than that. Judge Caprio continued, and now tears were openly streaming down his face. The court is going to make a donation to help with Sophia's medical expenses, and I'm personally going to make sure you get a parking pass for the hospital garage. You should never have to worry about parking when you're trying to be with your sick child. The courtroom erupted in applause. People were standing, some cheering, many crying. The police officer who had issued the citations was wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. Ms. Santos, would you come up here, please? He asked, gesturing to his bench. Maria, confused and still crying, walked around the side of the courtroom as the bailiff opened the gate. Judge Caprio came down from his bench and met her halfway. And then, in a moment I'll never forget, this dignified judge who presided over thousands of cases pulled this struggling mother into a tight embrace. You keep fighting for your daughter, he said into her ear, loud enough for those nearby to hear. You keep being the incredible mother that you are, and you let us help you carry this burden. You don't have to do this alone. Maria collapsed against him, sobbing into his shoulder. Judge Caprio held her, his own tears falling, one hand gently patting her back the way a father comforts a child. The entire courtroom was in tears. The other defendants waiting for their cases, the attorneys, the staff members who usually maintain professional detachment. Everyone was emotionally overcome. I found myself setting down my pen because my hands were shaking too much to write. When they finally separated, Judge Caprio kept his hands on Maria's shoulders, looking directly into her eyes. "I want you to give the clerk your contact information," he said. "Our office is going to connect you with some resources. There are organizations that help families dealing with childhood cancer. There are grants available. There are people who want to help. They just need to know who needs it." Maria could only nod, unable to form words. Judge Caprio returned to his bench, but before he could call the next case, something remarkable happened. One of the attorneys in the courtroom, a man named David Chun who regularly practiced there, stepped forward. "Your Honor, if I may," he said, "I'd like to contribute to Sophia's medical fund as well, and I believe others here might want as well." Within minutes, a spontaneous collection was happening in the courtroom. People were pulling out their wallets, writing checks, handing cash to clerk. The police officer contributed. The other defendants waiting for their hearings contributed. Even the parking enforcement officer who had written the original tickets pulled a $20 bill from her wallet. Maria stood there, overwhelmed, watching this outpouring of generosity from complete strangers. She kept saying, "Thank you, thank you," over and over, but the words seemed inadequate for what she was feeling. Judge Caprio had to call a 15-minute recess to compose himself. When he returned to the bench, his eyes were still red, but there was a determination in his expression. "This," he said to the courtroom, "is why I do this job, not to punish people who are already struggling, not to add to the burdens of those who are carrying more than any person should have to carry, but to find justice. And sometimes justice isn't about the letter of the law. It's about recognizing our shared humanity." In the days that followed, Maria's story spread throughout Providence and beyond. Local news channels covered it. The Providence Journal ran a front-page story. A GoFundMe page was set up for Sophia's medical expenses, and it raised over $200,000 in just 2 weeks. But more than the money, something else happened. People began showing up at the hospital to be tested as potential bone marrow donors. The local donor registry saw a 300% increase in new registrations. And among those new donors was a match for Sophia. 3 months after that courtroom hearing, I received a message asking me to come back to Judge Caprio's courtroom. When I arrived, I found Maria and Sophia there. Sophia wearing a bright yellow dress, her head covered with a colorful scarf, but her smile absolutely radiant. Judge Caprio came down from his bench again, and Sophia ran to him, throwing her small arms around his waist. "Thank you for helping my mommy," she said in a small, sweet voice. Judge Caprio knelt down to her level, and once again, tears filled his eyes. "You keep getting stronger," he told her. "You keep fighting. You're the bravest little girl I've ever met." Maria told me later that the bone marrow transplant had been successful. Sophia still had a long recovery ahead, but her doctors were optimistic. And thanks to the donations and the resources Judge Caprio connected them with, Maria had been able to cut back to one job and spend more time with her daughter during her recovery. "He saved us," Maria told me, tears of gratitude in her eyes. Not just by dismissing those tickets, but by seeing us, by treating us like we mattered. He gave me hope when I had none left. That's the thing about Judge Frank Caprio that most people don't understand until they see it firsthand. He doesn't just rule on cases. He sees the people behind them. He recognizes that sometimes the people who come before him aren't criminals or scofflaws. They're just human beings trying to survive impossible situations. The story of Maria Santos and her daughter Sophia became legendary in Providence. But for Judge Caprio, it was just another day of trying to find justice in a world that isn't always just. Another opportunity to choose compassion over cruelty, understanding over judgment. And sometimes, as I learned that February morning, justice looks like a judge and a struggling mother crying together in a courtroom, holding on to hope in each other, reminding everyone watching that humanity, compassion, and love are still the most powerful forces in the world. I'm Adam Broderick, and in 23 years of covering the courts, I've never been more proud to tell a story.